Hi, hello. It is time to look at my top 10 anime of 2020. I think the recording lagged for a second. I said that it was time to look at my top 10 anime of 2020. That's not a surprise. Anyways, it was a pretty weird year for anime. A lot of shows having pretty unconventional release schedules, suffering major delays and stuff, of course, all because of COVID. And my anime watching habits also changed drastically because of COVID. I think if you had told me, hey, next year you're going to lose like 95% of your social opportunities and basically be stuck inside all day every day, I would have said, oh well, at least I'll get to watch a lot of anime. But I really didn't. This was actually one of the least anime intensive years. I chalk that up to like two things majorly. One is that I spent quite a long time like living with people. Usually I'm living by myself, but because of COVID, we had like a couple quarantine bubbling situations where I would just stay with particular people for extended periods, and both parties were not anime fans, so I didn't watch a ton of anime during those times. And also, somewhat ironically, I think another major limiter is that I joined an anime watching club. There was a club I used to meet up with every week that we would play rhythm games and watch anime. Now the meeting up part, of course, is out of the question. The rhythm games part, kind of scattershot, but the watching anime has been stronger than ever. Through Discord, we'll watch usually about 4 episodes of various shows per night. But because of that, I found myself not really super eager to pick up shows outside of that club schedule. And a lot of the shows we watched in club, well, maybe not a lot, like maybe half of the shows we watched in club were actually older shows, not 2020 shows. So as a result, my 2020 selections were pretty limited. Nevertheless, there are some great shows that came out last year that I'm very excited to talk about. Even though this video is hella late, I'm still so excited about them that I'm doing it eventually, now that I feel like it. So let's dive right in. The first show we're talking about is this. The Adventures of Lionfish. Look at him go. This is, of course, Hokago Taibo Nishi, or the Journal of the Breakwater Club. This is cute girls fishing up kind of gross things. And if you know the genre of cute girls kind of doing blank things, and Doga Kobo, the studio that made this, if you know their shows, you can deduce pretty accurately like 90% of what this show is like, which I'm fine with. Stories of exploring new things, getting good at new skills, bonding over these shared interests with new friends. These will never ever get old to me. I can watch a million shows like this. They can just keep recycling the same structure, the same general character archetypes, everything they need to. As long as the actual subject itself, as long as like what they're up to is novel, it's going to be a good time. And here the subject certainly is in the spotlight. Fishing is given a very thorough breakdown, everything from buying supplies to cooking up the meal afterwards. Wait, hold on. As it should be. Given that this is the main attraction of the show. And I was very happy with the amount of diagram space. This is something I'm always going on about, how much I love in anime. That when a character imagines something, when a character is explaining something, in this case, often fishing techniques, baiting techniques, how fish behave, that we see it. We see it in an art style that's usually very dissimilar to the normalized style of the show, a very cute little diagram space. This is one of my favorite things in anime, and it came through in a wonderful way here. I was impressed that they showed the gory details of actually preparing the fish that they catch. Cleaning, gutting, descaling, all the bloody details, which normally I would think a show like this, trying to be very pleasant and relaxing, would shy away from. But I really appreciate stuff like that. I'm very fascinated with what goes into food preparation, especially things like seafood, where a lot of the quality comes from its freshness and the purity of the flavor, that it's not over-processed or anything. So to see the immediate phase between a living fish in the water and your meal is really captivating for me. I know it's pretty off-putting for other people, which is again why I'm surprised that they committed to it, but it was very fascinating, and it's just cool to see stuff like that animated. And it just looks so delicious. And the idea of catching your own fish and cooking it and eating it just seems so satisfying. I really wish I wasn't so landlocked. I'm like hours away from like lakes, let alone God knows how far away from the ocean. And sometimes they even get into nice environmental messages with, keeping the waters clean, not overfishing, respecting all sorts of different wildlife and the natural ecosystem and eco-cycles and stuff. The cat just made a weird noise. So yeah, pretty nice show. Just did everything I hoped it would. Next we have this rainy bicycle show. Oh, hey, kitty. This is Adachi Toshimamura. Isn't it amazing? This is how far we've come in Yuri. That this is a straight up, both girls' names as the title, Yuri romance series. Like, so pure romance that it's just girl and girl as the title. It can release, and it isn't even a huge deal. People aren't freaking out about this anymore because it is becoming somewhat commonplace for Yuri romance to get adapted into anime. Isn't that wonderful? I'm so just amazed at how far we've come. So inspired, so moved. This is a strange, awkward, fumbling, introspective story about difficulties and understanding and expressing your innermost feelings. That's Yuri. That's what I want from Yuri. That's everything I could want in Yuri. There's this element, I'd say this is the kind of the most unique element to the plot, that both of the characters are delinquents at the start of the series, that they're skipping class all the time and they're hanging out in the gym in this kind of secluded area while they wait for the school day to end. And I found that really, really compelling. There's a feeling in a lot of Yuri series of kind of going beyond the moment where the characters start to act in a way that is kind of outside their expectations for their own life. They start to sort of fall into patterns and lifestyles that they might have thought impossible. They might have like dismissed as unrealistic or even undesirable. But something starts to transform within them. And of course, this is often paralleled with their falling in love, with their realizing of lesbian feelings and such. And just like a feeling of abandoning something else while doing that, like just a radical reprioritization of what matters to you, I think really speaks to a huge transformative potential in Yuri. That this feeling of they don't really explicitly say why to each other, why they're skipping class. They're not really interested in debating whether or not they ought to return to class. They've gone beyond into some sort of new space for both of them that they share. I don't know. I find in a lot of my favorite Yuri series, there's some feeling like this. Some feeling of just kind of going beyond what you thought were the limits of your life. And I think this is what is most compelling to me about this series. Because there's some strange stuff that I didn't really want, like the whole alien girl subplot. Just why? I don't know. I wasn't a huge fan. Some plot threads kind of seem disjoint. Sometimes kind of the lesson they learned in terms of how you ought to communicate, how you ought to express yourself, seemed strange. I don't know if it actually seemed like cohesive and consistent with the overall lessons of the series, but I think in moments where some elements are kind of weak, where it's not like a super overwhelmingly masterpiece type story, I think again, this is a series that I've seen several adaptations of. It's from a light novel originally. They have 2 different manga series, each of which I think has strengths and weaknesses, and the anime as well has strengths and weaknesses. So I think maybe in the light novel, or maybe in some sort of ideal adaptation, there is an extremely compelling and well-written story. But here, in the areas where it falls flat, it's like we perceive more directly in that contrast what is like really truly essential about this genre, like what actually keeps us tuning in, which of course is the communication between the girls and their self-realization and such. So in that way, it felt like a very pure Yuri series, in that in the end, I only wanted to see the progression of their relationship, or rather that was far and away my number one priority with the show. Hey, kitty. Production is also really cool. A lot of scenes where the characters' emotions kind of spill out into reality. They have these like vivid fantasies where the world is cast in the light of their feelings. It felt a little Monogatari-ish. That's some high praise for me. It felt like they were aspiring to that sort of production that Shaft does in Monogatari, where you're constantly in this kind of semi-real space. I think they could have gone even further in that direction, but I was surprised at the boldness, and I was surprised at how cool and exciting some of those sequences are. Okay, next we have Kakushigoto, Angry Glasses Man. At long, long last, we have a successor. Kumeta Sensei is the mangaka for both series, and Shaft was the production team for Sayonara Zetsubo Sensei SZS. There had never been, in the many years since that show aired, something that I could say was its successor, something that could stand next to it, that has the same sort of appeal. But here it is. Kind of unsurprisingly because it's the same mangaka, but a lot of stuff goes into it being, I think, a worthy follow-up to SZS. It's the same wild kind of train wreck humor, puns and slapsticks, and sometimes really deep-cutting social satire that reveals an intelligence that in other aspects they're doing their best to hide. The same sharp but really playful production, the same iconic looks, just in that screen cap I showed, just the gradient kind of patterned background and the way they style the hair and stuff, the sharp, like, immediate cut to close-up and fast movement of face that just really gives everything a super tight, consistent comedic timing, and yet really playful too, totally willing to delve into other animation styles and totally break the normal diegesis of the show just to do a really goofy gag. Just the contrast of both that restraint and that total free-for-all attitude, I think is fantastic. And of course, the characterization is at the heart of these sorts of comedy series, and here they achieve what I would call a cake-eat scenario, both having your cake and eating it too. Hey, buddy. What are you sniffing? Where everything is like hyper archetyped. Everyone is like a over-the-top parody of themselves. And yet, as you get to know them, you realize that they're still very human, still very three-dimensional, well-defined characters that have a full suite of emotions and motivations and fears and connections. Where it really excels, though, is in realms that SZS never even tried to venture into. The central tensions and mysteries, there's a lot of like flash forwards, you're trying to kind of piece together how the present and the past and the future all connect. They're really built up with some sort of sense of dramatic arc, some sort of realization and revelations and this growing epiphany that you're both anticipating and dreading what could be a horrible truth. Like, it's really suspenseful, it's really engrossing. Rather than SZS, which had some twists, but the twists were very much just like lol surprise, which I love, and I love that SZS was so irreverent to itself that they went for such shocking, kind of unsupported twists where the clues where they existed were so obscure and nonsensical. But I'm just really impressed that the author was able to build up such a kind of a subtle but grand story that made you invested in these like 3 generations of family and everything. It's an irreverent but fascinating look into the disjoint but parallel worlds of manga writing and parenting. I think this is great. We kind of look at a lot of story tropes in the father raising a child series genre, which is quite popular. But we also look at a lot of the tropes of the kind of manga series, which is also quite popular, and where it becomes really novel is where there's plot lines that parallel these two things or put them in awkward contrasts. The central premise, which I guess I didn't mention, is that the father is a mangaka and he makes like a really silly, lewd joke sort of gag manga. He does not want the daughter to know. He pretends he's just like a normal businessman. He's constantly on the verge of being found out. So just kind of seeing him, I don't know, like it's still fascinating to get glimpses into these worlds, even if they're constantly being played off of each other in the most irreverent ways. And then there's big cry type moments. These hit the hardest when you didn't think you were anywhere near that emotional space, and suddenly you're just like, oh, wow, this is life, huh? And it reminds me of in the ED, right near the end, they hit these huge piano chords. Bum, dun, 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 dun. I don't remember what it is exactly, but and then just suddenly your heart stirs, and this kind of wacky, weird, goofy time you've been having is totally recontextualized as like this really heartfelt, sentimental moment. Very impressive. Ultimately, this is a message about the overwhelming insufficiency of love. That even though it moves us beyond anything we thought we were capable of, even though we move ourselves to do things that we never thought we had the potential to do out of love, in the end, we still yearn for something more. That's good. That's a good message. Okay, next we have this show about girl who is asleep. Maojo de Oyasumi. Kidnap Princess tries to get a good night's sleep in the Demon King's lair. That old chestnut from this all too tired premise. There's a surprising amount that opens up for them sticking to this routine of every episode is a couple little quests of hers to get a better night's sleep. There's a whole world that's built. The lore of the Demon King's regime, the questing hero who's constantly failing in their attempts to come save her, the historic conflict between the human realm and the demon realm, which gets built up here and there through little snippets of lore. There's a huge roster of characters, all of them goofy and fun, and yet just endearing enough that you find yourself fond of them and remembering them, even though they don't stray too far away from their very goofy roles. Nowadays, though, like even this idea of like, oh, it's a really irreverent parody of Dragon Quest type worlds and mechanics. Haha, it's the hero trying to fight the demon lord, but guess what? The hero's a wacky, incompetent guy, and the demon lord, he's a little more human than you might expect. Even that is cliche. We've seen like a million things like that before, but the series like works in that space. It's not content saying that in itself is the joke, but just kind of creates this world as something that we're already kind of familiar with, as a way to push like really creative comedy. That we get our expectations of subversion are subverted even further, and not back to sincerity, but into an even wackier post sincerity. The biggest laughs, though, I think, come from our princess being really the greatest demon of all. Her single-minded obsession with achieving comfort comes at the cost of many. Her body count is in the dozens, not to mention the psychological devastation. Almost all of her schemes involve just murdering a demon and harvesting their parts in order to make bedding. And it is just as terrifying as it sounds. When she's not doing that, she's manipulating people to her own ends. Just this single-minded, terrifyingly simple, completely relentless and unstoppable demonic beast that is the princess. It's hilarious. It's consistently hilarious, especially watching it with my friends and in the group chat and going, here comes murder. She's going to use murder. She's going to kill him. Here comes the scissors. And every time. But despite this evil, we can't help but cherish her accomplishments and happiness. That whenever she falls asleep and goes, Suya, we feel happy, we feel cozy too. This is some of Dogakobo's wildest production. There's a huge range of animation styles, and yet all of it has the same kind of quirky charm. It sticks to a very consistent, overarching aesthetic, even if it delves so deeply into different things. It's the second Dogakobo show on this list, by the way. Next, we have BNA. Here we have a trigger show that shows both extremes of their styles in absolute full force. We have beautiful, dynamic, and creative Sakuga-type action scenes, richly detailed landscapes full of funny little in-jokes and parody signs and stuff. But we also have the classic shitposty two-frame goofs and gags where they reduce animation to the most strained definition of the term and use kind of like PowerPoint type movements to hilarious comedic ends. There's a complex, some might say convoluted, world and plot with centuries of lore interwoven with dense mystery that much of it doesn't pay off until the very end. You're left in the dark wondering what all the different agents are trying to achieve, who's on whose side, who can we trust, who has connections to all these lore hints in the past. Almost overwhelming. But then there's some very silly, very fun standalone adventures that are just one episode long and don't have any of those complications. But they still have a lot of heart. They still move you in some way and make you compelled. The ratios, I think, are not quite perfect for me. I think, in my mind, the ideal trigger show leans a little bit more to the latter of these categories than the former. Just because there's often a point in trigger shows where I'm just like, all right, sure, yeah, the DNA modifying beast, legacy of the. But I really appreciate that they went for both so hard. They went so hard in both directions. I think is really admirable that they really tried to capture the full spectrum of appeal for their shows. But even when, things kind of get confusing and overwhelming and you wonder what the point of some plot decisions are, you can connect through really lovable characters. You can still find yourself rooting for our heroes. Most developments and twists bring you closer in empathy and understanding, which I think is the best way to do it, that you're not left feeling disconnected from characters as they learn things that you don't fully grasp, but instead you learn alongside our protagonist and feel closer and closer to her position in the world. And such adorable designs. I just love how the characters look in this series. Just the way they move, the way they transform, the fact they all have human and beast forms. It's just so fun. It's just so cute, so quirky, so charming, and it's amazing that they've carved a new niche into this extremely crowded space of anthropomorphized animals. That they're still able to make their own brand new aesthetic for this brand new animal. The more I think about it, this series is just the anti-Beastars. Really, like in every way, shape, and form. Just kind of the lore and the world building, the way the characters are designed, the general like tone of the show. It's just the anti-Beastars. Okay, we're gonna talk about the next 5 in, I think, a separate episode, just so it's not overwhelmingly long. So I will see you tomorrow as we talk about Sleepy Robot Arm Girl Show, whatever that could be. Bye-bye.